There are hundreds, if not thousands, of videos of beheaded Palestinian babies and children, Palestinian children with severed limbs, killed by Israel. And not a single corporate media outlet has reported on how Israel has systematically beheaded Palestinian children on a daily basis for the last 15 months. And yet every single one of these Western media outlets was so quick to spread the mass atrocity propaganda in order to manufacture consent for Israel's genocide by repeating a story about an incident which never took place.
We have some really disturbing new information out of Israel. The Israeli Prime Minister's spokesman just confirmed babies and toddlers were found with their heads decapitated.
I choked up earlier reading this new revelation about 40 babies being killed.
Oh my God.
And some of them being beheaded. And I was like, how can any human being do that to a baby?
So what message does that send? That mythical beheaded babies, because they were Israeli, are to be reported on when the incident never happened, but that Palestinian babies and children, when they're beheaded and their limbs are severed and they're found hanging from trees with half of their body missing, that they are not worth the coverage to report on their experience, on their premature death at the hands of Israel and the United States. Did you know that Israeli occupation forces tied explosives to the body of an 80-year-old Palestinian man who was forced to clear booby-trapped houses, and once they released him, they shot and killed him and his wife? Did you know that Israeli soldiers were captured on film raping a Palestinian hostage? And when news of this came to light, Israeli far-right politicians and soldiers and ordinary people protested outside of the facility where the soldier was being held, demanding that he be released. And in parallel, the Israeli Knesset engaged in debates on the right of Israeli soldiers to rape Palestinian hostages.
תרלול הזה, שיש מי שבפרקליטות חושב שאפשר לבוא ולעצור חיילים על דברים שעושים למחבלי נוח'בה, לא נגמר. אנחנו לא יכולים להמשיך כרגיל.
להכניס מקל לרקטום של בן אדם, זה לגיטימי?
כן, אם הוא נוח'בה, הכל לגיטימי לעשות לו. הכל! הכל!
One of the soldiers who was involved in the rape had a media tour all around Israeli media stations and took off his ski mask and was revered as a national hero by members of Israeli society. Did you know that a young Palestinian boy by the name of Saddam Rajab was killed in the occupied West Bank after an Israeli occupation soldier shot him in the stomach? Even though the evidence is right there, it was still responded to by supporters of Israel as being fake or being what they call Pallywood, because not only does Israel kill Palestinians with impunity, but Israel's supporters, to believe that their ideology is morally justified, when they do see images of Israel's policies against Palestinians, they just claim that they're fake, that they didn't happen, that they're made up entirely by Palestinians to claim global sympathy. Did you know that Israeli occupation forces recently killed a 2-year-old Palestinian girl by the name of Layla al-Khatib, who was sitting down to eat dinner with her family in occupied Jenin? She was shot in the head by an Israeli sniper. Not only did the Israeli sniper shoot her, but then the Israeli occupation forces prevented her and her family from rushing to get medical care, and she died. This, of course, is not an aberration. This happens all the time on a daily basis. Prior to October 7th, 2022 had been the deadliest year for Palestinian children killed by Israeli occupation forces in the occupied West Bank in 15 years. But did you even know about it? Did you know that in 16 months of genocide in Gaza, Israel has managed to halve the life expectancy in Gaza? If that isn't proof of genocide, I don't know what could be proof of genocide. Did you know that Israel withholds Palestinian bodies and prevents Palestinians that it killed from being returned to their families? Over 600 Palestinian bodies are being illegally held by Israel, some since the 1960s. Did you know that if you go on Google Maps and you look for satellite images of Beit Hanun, you will see that Israel has completely destroyed and erased that village in Gaza, that city in Gaza, and instead replaced all of the buildings, the stores, the homes, the parks, the schools, the mosques, the churches, with thick mud embedded with Israeli tank marks in the shape of a Star of David. Not a single corporate mainstream media outlet covered that story, thought it would be important. Consider, for example, as part of Israel's genocide, Israel has destroyed the overwhelming majority of all the infrastructure that is related to the provision of basic services like electricity, like water, like sanitation. It destroyed 90% of the housing units in Gaza. 90%. If that isn't genocide, I don't know what is. You can't possibly make the argument that the destruction of the majority, the overwhelming majority of all housing units in Gaza does not constitute intent to destroy a people in whole or in part. If you continue to get your information from mainstream media, I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't know any of these stories. But I think we should understand that if any one of these incidents had happened to an Israeli child or an Israeli family, then not only would the media be all over the story, politicians would be condemning it in the strongest possible terms, there would be widespread coverage and discussion about the horrors that that individual had endured. But when violence is carried out against Palestinians systematically in much wider proportions over 76 years, it is something that the global north wants us to accept as a reality, as a status quo, as the default. And as a result, evil is allowed to prevail with absolute impunity. After 15 months of a daily live stream genocide, we're really at a very critical turning point. Either the global community decides that international law is to mean something and is to actually be applied consistently to all offenders, no matter who they are, no matter where they're from, no matter the circumstances, or we decide to throw it away entirely. I don't see a middle ground because the Gaza genocide has exposed the double standards and the hypocrisy that is so embedded into the system. If you take the example of the ICC warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, you've had states in Europe come out and say they're just not going to honor the warrants. Netanyahu and Gallant will be allowed to visit their states in total impunity and that they won't comply with the obligation to actually arrest them and hand them over to The Hague. That's their obligation as signatories to the Rome Statute, the treaty that establishes the International Criminal Court. And in retaliation for the issuance of the arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant for crimes against humanity and war crimes committed in Gaza, the U.S., under the Trump administration, has sanctioned the International Criminal Court. That should make everyone stop to pause and reflect on who the good guys are in this and who might the bad guys be. The world that we're creating, if we continue to ignore international law, is a very dangerous world. It's a world where states' conduct is not bound by any notions of law or morality. It's a world where the only principle is if I can get away with it, then I will do it. It's a world that is going to, in many ways, resemble much of the death and destruction and killing that we saw at the height of empire hundreds of years ago. But also, it's a world that's going to be much more dangerous even than that because of the ability now to accelerate and to automate killing and destruction through the technologies of today that we didn't have back then. Every single crime that they get away with is merely a precursor for a more egregious crime in the future. And the only thing that can stop that pattern from continuing is accountability. That's why it's so important for people all around the world to demand that policymakers and governments comply with their obligations under international law. And in this current moment, that means allowing for the reconstruction of Gaza by Palestinians for Palestinians without the interference or the meddling of the West. And international law requires that Israel unconditionally and immediately withdraw from the occupied Palestinian territories. The Gaza Strip, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, there is no debate. There is widespread consensus, and this was affirmed most recently by the International Court of Justice in its July 2024 advisory opinion, where the court held that Israel's existence in the occupied Palestinian territories is illegal. Israel's existence is illegal. That means that if Israeli soldiers were to plant flowers in Gaza, that act would be illegal because they have no right to be there in the first place. It's Palestinian land. The court went so far as to say that Israel's conduct in the occupied Palestinian territories violates a number of peremptory norms under international law. These are norms of the highest order from which no derogation is possible. They're the most serious violations of international law. Violations like the prohibition on apartheid, against racial discrimination, against violating self-determination of Palestinians, against the acquisition of territory by force. The court found that Israel was engaged in all of these extremely serious breaches towards the Palestinians, and that the only solution is an immediate and unconditional withdrawal of Israeli forces from Palestinian land. Now, when you compare that, which is what Israel's obligations are under international law, with the public discourse in the West, you see how far we are from adopting a policy that is compliant with the law. So this is really important. Israel must leave Palestinian land and has no legal claim to it whatsoever. Not to build settlements there, not to extract wealth from Palestinian land through the theft of resources like Palestinian gas off the coast of Gaza, not to take our water, not to do anything there. It has no right to be there, period. It's so essential in this moment to support independent media outlets, which are oftentimes the only source of amplifying Palestinian voices and supporting truth and justice. Support independent media, support Double Down News on Patreon. And if you'd like to hear more from me, follow on Instagram at Gazan Girl and join our Patreon, patreon.com/PalestinePod.